In today's show, it's NBA draft prospect analysis. I'm going to be joined by Stephen Gillaspie, and we're going to talk Jalen Hood-Schifino, Leonard Miller, Anthony Black, and more. Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com. And you can find me on Twitter, as always, at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA. When you enter the promo code LockedOnNBA, they'll throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti-style tumbler with every order. Thank you for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free. We are available on all platforms. We've done a bunch of NBA prospect stuff already. 15 players in the books. We've got team preview shows on the go as well. Or review shows on the go as well. Had our first NBA draft mock draft. There's so much stuff going on now. I am recording this one a little bit ahead of time, so I can't tell you what the updated series scores are in the playoffs. But at the moment, the Nuggets are up 1-0, and the Heat are up 1-0 in the conference finals. But you know what? In 3 days' time, when you're watching this, who knows what the score is going to be. We're going to talk to Stephen Gillaspie, so I might as well bring him in. So, here he is. I think it's for the first time in this show. I've been on your show before, Stephen, but here he is. Welcome to the show, Stephen Gillaspie. Welcome, mate.
Hey, Josh, I appreciate you having me, man. Like you mentioned, we've done some work together before. Been listening to you for a while. It's an honor and a privilege to be on the show today, man. I'm excited to talk about the players that we have on top.
Yeah, we've got 5 players we're going to talk about today, but one thing I have, and I should have actually just prepped you about this before I went on air, but what I've been asking these guys is, we saw the lottery the other day, and there's some discussion about some of the top 5 picks. So just quickly, who are your top 5 guys? Like, what's the order that you would go in? Understanding where the teams currently are, and we understand there might be trades at 3 and 4, like all that sort of stuff. But who's your top 5? I think we know who one is, but let's go through the top 5 quickly.
Yeah, luckily I've been preparing for this show. I've been listening to your show for a little while now, so I kind of already pre-gamed this a little bit, so forgive me there. But number 1, San Antonio Spurs. I think everybody is on board with this one, but Victor Wembanyama, the Spurs continue their tradition. Every 20 years they get to draft a generational big man at the top of the draft, so fortunate for them and their fan base. I am also of the mindset that Scoot Henderson is the second player no matter what team is available, and that's just, again, the traditional, not a knock against Brandon Miller or anything like that. He's going to be an absolute fine player. I just think that Scoot is on a whole nother level. People talk a lot about the athleticism, but I think the intelligence that he plays with, it gets slept on a little bit. I look at him as a guy who sees the basketball the same way as like a Chris Paul or Steve Nash. The passing is there as well. It just so happens that he is an athletic freak of nature, which helps him out as well. So I think Charlotte goes and picks him up there. Portland, I think that they're smart to get the other guy who's being considered at number 2 right now on Brandon Miller, regardless of what they want to do with Damian Lillard. I think a fun pick for the Houston Rockets. Obviously, there's talks that they need a guard, but they're pretty set at the 2 and the 4. They don't really have a 3. I think that the next best player on my board right now is Cam Whitmore, and that's who I would say if I'm Houston. I think that he has kind of star upside at that wing position, and based on the athleticism that he has, based on the scoring, he had a little bit of a injury concern at the beginning of the season, came on the season late. Villanova was not the program that we have grown accustomed to watching. I think that he has really good upside there, the number 4. And then the Detroit Pistons, I go Jarris Walker. I just think that he's an intelligent guy at the 4. One thing that's under-discussed with him, in my opinion, Josh, is the fact that he's also a capable shooter. He's shown that this year, and highly under-discussed when you consider how great of a defender he looks to be. Also, the way he sees the court and the way he can move the ball. All of that is great, but he can space the floor too. People aren't really talking about that a lot, which I think kind of makes him and Duren a very scary front court, considering how strong both of those young men are.
So there you go. There's a different top 5 than we've had with some of the other guys. This is how this draft looks. There's just so many interesting and talented players that there's going to be many different opinions. But let's go to a guy that you are higher on, because I'm asking everyone who's someone they're higher on the consensus, and we're going to go to Indiana. Bang! Bang! It's Jalen Hood-Schifino, who is... Again, I say this all the time. Every player in this first round is 19 years of age, or they're 18. He's 19. He will be 20 really soon. He'll be 20 on draft day, I believe. He's a tall point guard, 6'6". You have seen him in mock drafts go end of the first round, outside of the lottery. He has some real shooting struggles last season. Under 50% true shooting is rough, but he's tall. So why are you higher on him than the general consensus? Because as you can see, the consensus is back end of the first round. Are you just looking at the height? Are you looking at playmaking? Are you believing in the shot? What is it about him?
Yeah, so I have him 7th on my big board right now, which is considerably higher than where the consensus has him. And I think, Josh, what we've seen historically is that players of his size and feel, it's not just the size. The size does play an important part in this, but also the feel for the game that he has. And when we see guys like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, where they're drafted in that kind of late lottery range. When we look at Tyrese Halliburton, where they're drafted in that late lottery range. Obviously, now if we had revisionist history, we could say, well, these are the reasons why they should have been drafted higher. This is why they were taken lower. I think we can have a similar conversation with Jalen Hood-Schifino, where you look at the efficiency numbers, you look at the struggles that he had at some points during the season. But if you take all prospects, Josh, and look at their best performances throughout the season and compare them against each other, JHS is right up there with anybody else. I just think that the way that he sees the floor is impeccable. He played with another high usage guy, with Trace Jackson-Davis at Indiana. And then playing for Coach Mike Woodson in Indiana really doesn't do him any favor schematically, because they play a very traditional college basketball scheme. I think in an NBA look, the floor is going to be more opened up. It's going to be more pick and roll heavy. Even being able to run DHOs off of a distributing big man, something that he showed that he can do in Indiana. I think that the offensive looks that he can give a team are going to make him one of the highest redraftable guys within this class. I have him ridiculously high. I understand the consensus has him a little bit lower. That's just how I look at him.
In terms of, say, like another really tall point guard in this class, Anthony Black, like you put Hood-Schifino above Black?
I do, because I think that Hood-Schifino, the shooting indicators are there, which for Anthony Black, I think that's going to be the biggest knock on his game, despite the fact that he is a tremendous defender. We see players who come into the league with defensive-minded, defensive-first prospects. If the offense isn't there, then you don't really see the floor that much. Granted, Black is a good playmaker, but I also think that Jalen Hood-Schifino is right at that level, if not maybe a little bit better long-term. I just think that the offensive concerns and the struggles for Anthony Black make him a little bit lower rated on my board, although I have him 10th, right? So I'm not like saying he's not going to be a highly sought after prospect. I just think that the offense that JHS has is going to make him more valuable. In
terms of Hood-Schifino's playmaking ability, we had one game where he had 9 assists, which was against Iowa, started January, but no double-digit assist games, but there's some solid games there. But most of the time, he's like 3-4 assists per game. Mm-hmm. Is that a scheme thing? Is that a vision thing? Like, because the minutes are obviously there to get more assists, but the numbers are relatively low.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the scheme that Indiana ran, it was Trace Jackson-Davis first and everybody else second, right? Like, we saw Trace Jackson-Davis's playmaking improve, and that was something that people had concern about him as an NBA player in the shooting, where he took leaps and bounds as a playmaker due to the workouts that he had in the off season. JHS coming in on a team coached by Mike Woodson, who's a traditionalist by heart. He's going to favor the senior. He's going to favor the more proven commodity. Naturally, Jalen Hood-Schifino is going to take a little bit of a backseat, and that's why I think the assist numbers look the way they do.
It is interesting, these sort of tall point guards, and you're right about Shai and about Halliburton and these guys who fall in drafts and then end up, if we're going to redraft them, they're going to go in the top 2 and they're going to go in the top 3 type of scenario. And there's almost undoubtedly going to be someone in this draft who falls outside of the lottery or at the end of the lottery who's going to look like a top 5 player. This draft is, I believe, incredibly deep with high upside players. And I've currently got him quite low, Hood-Schifino. I think I've got him in the 20s, but when I did my mock draft straight after the lottery, I said, these guys in the 20s, this is a guy that when I redo this in 2 weeks' time, that I could easily see him jumping up for me into the top 15 because the size is there and the prototypical nature of the players who can have success in the NBA is there despite some of the numbers. So I did put him there initially, but I do think I'm going to end up moving him up a little bit higher. We're going to talk about someone in a second, though, that you are a little bit lower on. We'll get to that in 1 second. But today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. You're looking for comfortable pants? Of course you are. You're looking for pants or shorts that look good? Of course you are as well. You want long shorts because you're scared of showing off your good legs, or you want short shorts because you want to get those big thighs out there for the world to see. That's what Bird Dogs provides. Comfortable, stylish looking shorts that can pants that transition from working out, going to the supermarket, going to the shops, or going out for dinner. Bird Dogs has all of that, all those different options, many colors, many styles, whatever you're looking for, the comfort, the fit, it is all there with Bird Dogs. So if you also now go to birddogs.com, apart from getting these great looking shorts and great looking pants and things that are super comfortable, I love comfort, and I'm sure you do too, but you can now also get a free gift. So if you go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA and use the promo code LockedOnNBA, you get a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti style tumbler with every order. You're going to love the products that come, but you're going to love that free glass as well. So get over there to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA. Let's talk about a player that you are a little bit lower on. Let's give him a reality check. Bang! Bang! Leonard Miller. And I'm glad that the guy that you're higher on is Hood-Schifino and the guy you're lower on is Leonard Miller, because I'm the opposite. I've got Miller much higher than Hood-Schifino, and I've got him, I think I had him sneaking into the lottery when I did my mock draft, a guy that had an opportunity to be drafted last season coming from Canada, but ended up going to the G League Ignite. He's big. He's 19, of course, because everyone is. He's 6'10". He's got a range of late lottery through to the end of the first round. He averaged 20 points per 36 minutes. The shooting is a little bit of a concern, but the finishing at the rim is really strong. He had solid usage playing on a team with Scoot Henderson. I think there's good defensive potential there. What are you seeing that worries you with Leonard Miller?
So the biggest thing that I hear being put out about the reason why people are high on him, and Josh, I'd love to kind of hear your take on this while we're having this discussion, is that they like the motor and they like the effort that he gives, right? Like that's typically what I hear being put out whenever they're talking about drafting a guy in early, like kind of mid to late lottery range. And to me, Josh, I get it and I see it. I just don't value it as high as what other people are doing. Typically, like within that like mid to late lottery range, I'm still looking for a guy who could potentially kind of turn my franchise around. And if not, that I know for certain is going to be a starter on my team. Now, Leonard Miller has a lot of great redeemable qualities about him. His motor is second to none within this class. He is a tremendous rebounder. He has some unique grab and go stuff at his position too, which I think makes him a little bit more unique compared to some of the players. The shooting form is not pretty, right? I think it's going to take a certain type of team to where he is going to be a high minutes, high usage player. I think that he'll make the most out of whatever situation he's given. I just don't see as high of an upside with him. And the defense is kind of wax and wanes. The production is there in the G League. And there's a conversation to be had about how big men stats can be a little bit inflated, that within the G League, that the big man position really isn't as deep as some other places within, pre-NBA leagues and things of that nature. But it's hard to ignore the reasons why people like him. I just have him lower within kind of that late first round range where you can kind of see that 28 on the graphic. That's around the neighborhood I'm living with him.
I thought I had him a little bit higher in my mock draft. I had him 15, so just outside the lottery. I had him ahead of, obviously, of Hood-Schifino, who I had in the 20s, who was the guy we just talked about. You talked about the motor. I don't look at those sort of guys. I was very down on, say, Colin Sexton when that was one of his biggest things. Man, look how hard he tries. Okay, in the end, everyone tries, and it gets you somewhere, but it doesn't get you to the elite level. And I don't look at Miller as that's his only redeemable thing. Yes, the shooting's a concern. It's more to me the ability to finish, the strength, the speed, the burst, that sort of stuff is impressive to me. Age, growth in what he was able to do from last year to this year as well. The shooting's not quite there, but I want to hear your take on this, like someone like a Jalen Johnson in Atlanta now, who struggled in his first year or two, but I thought really came on at the end of this season. And I can see Miller as being a player, maybe not 100% the same as that, but with a little bit of that in what Jalen Johnson brings, like some incremental shooting improvements, some strong rebounding numbers, some good defensive stuff where he can do a little bit of switching, he can do a bit of rim protecting. I can see him being that sort of a player. Like, is that off base to you?
I don't think it's off base. There's some parallels within him, and I'm sure you're the same way, Josh. That there's really no perfect one-for-one comp with any sort of a basketball prospect. But I think that the difference between him and a player like Jaylen was, I think that the notion with Jaylen is that he was going to be a really good shooter at some point within his NBA career, just kind of reaching back in the archives of player projection. I don't think that a lot of people are really even talking about that with Leonard Miller, which is really a stark contrast from why people were infatuated with him in the prior draft class when there was rumors that he was going to come out, because he was a 6'10", 6'11" kid playing for the academy in Canada. And really the neat thing about him is that at his size, he was coordinated enough to execute a step back three.
Yep.
And now the one thing that I have said all season long, and I will continue to echo, is that he made a great decision by going to the G League. He needed to go in a pressure cooker, get the most amount of development within a short time frame to make the most on whatever stock that an NBA front office would have in him. I just don't think that the perimeter-based play is quite there where it was projected to be with a Jalen Johnson, but the production value that he has, I think he has a leg up over a guy like Jalen Johnson when he came out.
Let me ask you this question, and I don't actually know the answer to this, but is there anyone who's played for the G League Ignite who's actually shot well? Because I think Kuminga didn't really. Jalen Green's numbers didn't blow us away. Dyson Daniels didn't. Scoot Henderson shot poorly from three. Who else is even? Is there anyone who played there as a prospect?
Hardy struggled.
Exactly. Shot horribly and then shot way better in the NBA. Is there anyone who shot well as a G League Ignite prospect? I don't think there is.
Yeah, not any that come off the front of mine. And then even if you look at what they're doing now in the NBA, there's really hard pressed to find a lot of those guys that have made marked improvements in their 3-point shooting too. So I don't know. The great thing about the Ignite is that they say, okay, what are you great at? Okay, let's focus on the rest of your game. And I think that's why Leonard Miller has so much value at his size, is because whatever potential we thought we saw with him as a shooter in Canada, he has grown so much in literally every other aspect of his game. And that makes him a very real NBA talent.
Let's go to a guy that we did talked about him earlier. It is Anthony Black, the 6'7" guard from Arkansas, 19 years of age. You see him going in drafts like as high as 6, sometimes out of the lottery. I don't really think he falls out of the lottery. A lot of people are very interested in him, say, going to Washington at pick number 8. But as we've talked about, the shooting is a real concern. Probably the comparisons we see a lot with him are Lonzo Ball, a really, really high-level defender who is super tall, and has shooting concerns. I don't think he's the passer or the transition guy that what Lonzo Ball was or turned into. But defensively, he's right up there. The size is obviously awesome. But we touched on it a little bit earlier. The offensive stuff is a real problem. What is it? What's the major concern? Is it shooting from 3 exclusively? Is it finishing? Is it hesitancy? Or is all those things sort of combined?
I think it is a good combination of all of those 3. He never really looked comfortable. I'm an Razorback fan. I'm from Arkansas. That's where I hail from. So I have a vested interest in the success of that team. And one thing that I noticed with him is that the reluctancy, the shooting from 3, that was something that he really struggled with. And then, although he has the athleticism to get past people, the finishing numbers weren't always consistent either, right? And the creativity in his finishes weren't really something that I was a big fan of as well. But I think that at his size, the way that he sees the court, that those are things that could come in time. Like, he can grow to become a passable 3-point shooter, and with his athleticism and a more open court. And again, Arkansas wasn't a team built for success for him to grow in those areas either. When he and Trayvon Brazile got injured, those were the floor spacers. So with him and Ricky Council, Nick Smith being out of the lineup as well, Anthony Black kind of suffered from a condensed court and a defensive scheme that really hampered his ability to grow in those areas. But I think that the scoring is the biggest concern, but he's another one of these guys that can literally do everything else.
In terms of passing, because there aren't huge amounts of high-end point guards. There's obviously Scoot, but then it's just wings. It's wings and forwards, and there's not huge amounts of point guards in here. We talked about Hood-Schifino already. There's Cason Wallace. There's Anthony Black. What does his passing and his vision look? Where does that compare to these other point guards?
I think it's favorable. I think there is a clear step down once you get past Scoot. But once you start getting into some of these other guards, obviously Ben Thompson, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that his passing was on another level as well. But you start getting these other guys like Keontae, Cason Wallace, things like that. There's not a huge, vast difference in their playmaking or the way that they see the floor. Actually, I think Black sees the floor the best out of those guys, but his passing numbers are pretty similar. I just think that the upside for him to grow as a playmaker is a little bit better compared to those aforementioned guys with Wallace and George.
We talk about point guards and their inability to shoot at times, and whether it goes in or not sometimes isn't always the full story. Like, is he reluctant to shoot those threes? If he is left open, as we saw last season with Russell Westbrook so many times, will he shoot it, or will he be looking to do something different?
It really depends on the matchup, but for the most part, he was pretty reluctant. There were times where the defense would scheme him open, and he would hesitate. And he's one of these players with his athleticism that if he is given a runway, he can try to go over the top and finish with like a runner or draw in the defense and kick it out. But there was a lot of reluctancy to be able to put the ball up at all, and Arkansas suffered from that later in the tournament.
So he's an interesting player. Like, how high do you have him? You talk about having Hood-Schifino up at 7. Like, where do you have Black as a lottery player?
I have him at 10.
Okay.
I think that he's still a very valuable guy, and I know I'm kind of hitting the negativity a little bit hard here on the show, but again, the court vision is there, the athleticism is there. Players with size and feel typically succeed in the NBA, and I think that the scheme has a lot to do with the efficiency numbers that we're looking at here. So there is a potential upside with him being a high redraft candidate in years to come. He's just, again, at his age, the things he was doing as a freshman are very impressive. And despite his deficiencies, he had a lot of production, and we can't sleep on that defense that he brings. And the ability that an NBA team could draft a guy like Anthony Black and he could come and pick up a tough assignment defensively, full court if necessary, that has a lot of value too. And coaches are going to want players on their team that aren't going to embarrass themselves when they're defending some of the premier players in the NBA.
I had him at number 10 as well, actually. And a lot of people, when I did my mock draft, like, man, the Wizards, they've got to take a point guard. And I said, well, to me, there's a really clear delineation between my top 8 guys and the next group, which does include Black and Wallace and George and those sort of players. But yeah, look, again, this size, like, if the shooting works out, and the defense is already there, like, we know those things. If the other stuff comes around, and it doesn't always come around, it could, but it doesn't always. It does have a really interesting sort of overall package of a player. Let's go to another guy who's not as highly touted of a prospect, and that is another guard out of Creighton. It's Trey Alexander, who's a little bit older. He's just turned 20, 6'4". He's probably going to be a second-round guy. When I first started looking at mock drafts and gathering my mock draft ADP data, I don't think he was in any of the early ones that I did. And then he started to appear, and then he started to get towards the top of the second round. I've seen, 36 is the highest I've seen him go. He hit 41% from 3. The immediate thing is going to be, and I talked about this with Nathan on the first draft show we did, is that we have these weird biases that enter our heads, whether it's how someone looks. Are they black? Are they white? Are they European? What's their hair look like? What does their name look like? And we automatically go to that comparison. So people are going to go, oh, he's a 41% three-point shooter. His name's Trey. So is it Trey Murphy? So, that's the thing that people are going to do. I know that they're going to do that. But that shooting is there. It is real. He's obviously a little bit shorter than what Trey Murphy is. So what, outside of the shooting, which we feel pretty good about, good free throw shooting, good three-point shooting, what else does he do? Because you need to do something else to be able to generate consistent rotation roles in the NBA. So what else does Trey Alexander do?
Well, in this season, the biggest improvement that I saw was the playmaking. And that's something that distinguishes him from other guys that have a similar mold, right? Like, he's listed at 6'4", and so he's going to be an undersized kind of off guard in the NBA. Now, you can have success if if you are a player like that, I think every Miami Heat player fits that player archetype. It feels like. So Miami, here's a guy that you might be interested in. But the playmaking that he showed, playing with a player like Nembhard, the fact that Creighton could go to either one of those guys to create some shots, along with Baylor Shireman as well. The playmaking took leaps and bounds, but he is also a nasty defender. He is very talented on that end. It's just which one of these kind of 6'4", 3-and-D guys do you see the most value in? Looking at my board right now, I have him at 43, and I'm not sleeping well at night with that ranking, because I think that he could yield kind of high second round value in a guy who could make a rotation pretty easily, playing off of a jumbo creator and guarding the other guys at point guard or shooting guard, depending on the matchup. And he's a trusted, reliable three-point shooter as well. There's a lot to like. It's just that I don't know how much of that creation growth that we saw in college this season is going to translate to the NBA. So that's why I have a little bit of hesitation on what does he do when he's chased off of the three-point line in the NBA.
Just looking at my big board, because I've only done my mock draft for the first round on the show, but I actually had him at 33, so I had him a little bit higher than some of these other the mock drafts. Again, that shooting, the defensive ability, I think is really useful for those sort of players. You're right about the playmaking. That's an extra little thing he's got there. I would have loved if he was like 2 inches taller. I think that would be something that would really, that would probably push him to be a first round guy. I think if he's talking about a 6'6" shooting guard, hitting 40% of threes and have the ability to defend at that level, like that's unbelievably valuable player, but he's not. So, that maybe that 33 is going to end up being too high. So you're sort of sitting with him as a middle first round, or middle second round type of player.
Right.
The last guy, we're going to go to another guard, and that is Jaylen Clark, who a little bit older again, is 21, from UCLA. He's a bit bigger, 6'5", probably a mid to back end second round player. And the thing that's going to stand out here with him is defense. Like steal rate, unbelievable. Like that's 3.1 steals per 36 minutes for Jaylen Clark. Free throws not good, 3-pointers not good, 22 usage, but it's defense with Jaylen Clark. And we know that defensive guys are valuable, but then when you get to the pointy end of things and into larger roles, when you can get left alone on offense, it makes it hard for that defense to catch up to it. So I think, well, you can disagree with this if you want, but we look at the defense and go, yeah, it's ready, we're good. Perimeter defense, it's great. Defensive playmaker, that's really strong. But is there hope for any other stuff?
See, I don't know, and this hurts me because we've had a chance for the No Ceilings team. We've actually interviewed Jaylen Clark, and he's a fantastic young man. And the thing that I'm hesitant with, and Josh, I think you might kind of agree with some of my concerns, is that his biggest improvement as a player came this year, as an upperclassman, right? And we're looking at the age here. He's almost 22. He's coming off of a pretty significant lower body injury, which, Josh, I don't know how you feel about this. I typically add okay, if you're coming back off of a lower body injury, you're never really 100% yourself for 2 years, right? So how much is an NBA team going to invest in you with shooting concerns at your position, right? So he is a great slasher. He is a pretty decent ball mover, like a connective tissue guy. And that defense is nothing to sleep on, right? Like he could be a really reliable perimeter defender, but how much are you willing to invest in the shooting form and improving? How much are you willing to invest in a guy who's probably going to get picked up in the second round in 2 years from now, when we might not see the full effects of that lower body injury wearing off? I still would invest the second round pick in him. I have him at 55 on my board, but I totally get the wide range and also the upside of that. Like, he is a tremendous defender. I get why there are people that have him higher than me. I'm if I was an NBA front office and I'm investing millions of dollars in a roster spot, potentially in somebody, I am a little hesitant based on what is coming with Jaylen Clark this year.
Yeah, I am too. Like I have him. I think I've got him like just outside of the top 60, which you probably get adjusted at some point because that defense is there. But the point you bring up about guys who take these big steps forward as upperclassmen, people will often criticize, man, you focus so much on youth, and there's older players who have success all the time, and that's true. But my thing here is when we look at this year's draft, 2023 draft, it's really, really strong, right? Last year's draft was considered particularly weak over the last few years, and I think that has sort of panned out. And the fact that this guy, not against the guy, again, great kid, all that sort of stuff is true. But when you have an opportunity where a weak draft is and you don't come out in it, makes me think when he could have potentially gone higher because of the lack of strength in that class, makes me think that the part of the reason you were able to be as successful as you were is being 3 years older than a lot of the players you were going up against and pushing into a larger role on your team because you're older. That's always a little red flag. It's not the be all and end all, but I always look at it and go, okay, why didn't you come out last year? And I have the same idea, like Chris Murray, even like a Taquavion Smith. You could have come out last year, and you could have probably gone a little bit higher than what you did this year. But why didn't you? So that always leads me to some concerns with it. So that's how I view those guys who really burst when they're juniors or seniors.
Yeah, I think that there's any sort of mechanism that you have for yourself in your draft evaluation. There's support for it, and there's reasons why it doesn't always pan out. And I'm not an ageist guy, right? Like, I don't let age necessarily affect my evaluation on face value. But when we're looking at injuries, we're looking at when he took major strides within his game. We're looking at size, how that translates to the NBA based on the position he's likely to play. It just certainly doesn't help that if he's going to be a second-round pick and really you're only guaranteed 2 years potentially on an NBA team. And again, with that lower body injury at that age, I could just understand why an NBA front office would be reluctant to invest a whole lot of value in that and feel like you had to be married to the guy.
Yeah, you could end up seeing him maybe sign as a two-way rehab with a team and then see what happens after that, maybe especially with the third two-way contract coming in for this season as well. So maybe that's the direction that he goes there. You might pick him at 60, put him on a two-way, or you have a priority undrafted free agency situation and see where it goes. But you're right, like second-round picks don't get 4 years to develop. They get limited time, and when you're not there for a chunk of the first one, then that can lead to some concerns. Stephen, that will bring us to an end. So thank you for discussing all of those players with me today and going through a bunch of draft evaluation stuff and just talking about the draft as a whole. Tell people what you've got going, what you've got happening at No Ceilings, and the stuff that you're working on social media, all that sort of stuff.
Well, Josh, again, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to have you on No Ceilings earlier in the year. Looking forward to continuing this working relationship that we're establishing. But for people who want to find and follow me, interact with me, I'm most active on Twitter at Stephen G. Hoops. That's Stephen with a PH, the letter G, and then Hoops. All of my written work is available at NoCeilingsNBA.com. We've done a pretty talented job, if I can pat ourselves on the back. We have over 80 individual prospect breakdowns on the website, not to mention hundreds that we've mentioned in other pieces as well. We just released a mock draft and a big board at the website. We also have the mock draft available on our podcast. That's No Ceilings NBA, anywhere you get your podcast. And, we have a lot going on. We have a draft guide coming out as well, so stay tuned for that. And, we love being involved in the draft community. So just please feel free to reach out to us. And Josh, again, thank you so much for having me, man. It's an honor and a privilege to be here.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely.
And that'll do it for me today. Don't forget, follow this podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on the Odyssey app. If you're on YouTube, you thumb it up and you leave your comments down below. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.